most of this audience know they're in for a real treat. We're inviting Jim Beever to speak on a persistence of vision, protecting the quilt of habitats drawn together by the threads of water. Jim?
When I was asked to do a keynote here for the stewardship conference, it occurred to me that this is something I've been doing for a pretty long time. I first got involved with land acquisition as a high school student in 1972, well, in Florida. First got involved in Florida in 1972. And one thing is clear, and as I look around the room and look at all the many partners I've worked with on so many different projects in this area and drawing together all the different habitats we've worked on, is that we've had a persistence of vision. That our view of the long reach in what we achieve through land acquisition and land stewardship has always been there, and we are achieving it. That we're making good progress as we go, and even though we have some absolutely unintelligent blocks put in our way by sources that should not be doing it, who really should be good stewards for Florida, we have been the good stewards for Florida. And we have had that persistence of vision, and we will continue to do so. And what we're protecting is a quilt of habitats. If you think about all the many different habitats here in Florida, many of which are unique, all of these quilts are different habitats of equal importance. No one habitat is more important than the other. Each of them perform valuable functions, are home for unique species, are doing things for us and are helping each other. If we purchased every xeric oak scrub in South Florida, they would not stand alone. They would not be sustainable. We could not manage them in isolation. And in fact, if we did every mangrove, those mangroves won't persist through the long view. In fact, those mangroves are moving. The salt marshes are moving into the pine flatwoods and eventually the xeric oak scrubs. And we need to have landscape scale visions of our land acquisition and our planning, and we've had that. We were one of the first areas in the country to have understood that we needed to be able to have large landscape scale acquisition, protection, and that we needed to use many, many different tools, not just one way of doing our protection or of doing our stewardship, because each project has its own unique set of circumstances and tools that it needs to use. And that all of these unique habitats, all of which are a patchwork quilt, are drawn together by the thread of hydrology. And the health of Charlotte Harbor, the health of the water quality that is in the bay out here, starts in the xeric oak scrubs in Central Florida, in Polk and Hendry, and the watersheds of the Peace, the Myakka, the Caloosahatchee, the watersheds of the Estero Bay. We have had great success in land acquisition and conservation and stewardship in the CHNEP. In 1998, a goal was set to increase the conservation lands, and that goal has been met once and is about to be met twice over. A 91% increase in conservation lands from 1998 to 2012. If we take a look at starting back in 1970, about when I first started getting involved in this, we've had a 415% increase in conservation lands within our region. This is outstanding work, and all of you should be very proud of your effort that you've put in. And I'm not just talking to the people who are officially land stewardships, officially land acquirers. The citizens of Southwest Florida should be very proud of what they've achieved, because no major conservation effort in Southwest Florida has ever succeeded without citizen support. And the role of the government is in service to that support of the citizens. The citizens initiated the vision of a Southwest Florida that looked different than Southeast Florida, that looked different than Tampa Bay, that wasn't Texas. A place where we would be able to enjoy the unique Southwest Florida life and at the same time be able to have those things that we like in terms of a general comfort against things like malaria and, generally standing in water for about 3 months of the year. So it's the citizens in the community that make or break an acquisition project. And I want to really stress this because occasionally I'm working with groups that are wanting to just go alone. They think, well, this is what we've got to do. We're going to do it, and then we'll tell the citizens this is what we're going to do. That doesn't work. And in all the projects I worked on where we've tried to get citizen funding under like a bond initiative or get a local government to do a tax for land acquisition, everyone has succeeded except for one where they told the citizens, give us the money and then we'll tell you what we will buy. Each time that people have worked successfully, in Lee County and Collier County and Sarasota County, other counties that I've worked with, even on the East Coast, when they've told the citizens, this is what we're purchasing, this is why it's valuable, this is what we want to protect, the citizens have voted yes, in many cases overwhelmingly yes. But the one county that said, just give us the money and we'll tell you, our experts will tell you what we're going to purchase, that was the one bond issue that failed. Now, back in the early 60s, concerned citizens in Lee County began a movement to save Estero Bay from development. They had seen what happened in Tampa. They had seen what happened in Miami. And so in '66, they formed their own conservation association. It wasn't one of these national groups, the Lee County Conservation Association. And the Southwest Florida Conservation Clearinghouse, which is the grandparent of EcoSwift today, got together and convinced the trustees of the Internal Improvement Trust Fund, which in those days had more people and actually had more power than the trustees have today, that the state of Florida should pass the first aquatic preserve law in the United States. I want to stress that this came from the local citizens. It came from commercial fishermen working with recreational fishermen. It came from senior citizens. It came from young students. People all working together, and the idea was started from the citizens. It wasn't that Tallahassee said, oh yeah, we need aquatic preserves. Tallahassee will never come up with an original idea. The ideas come from here, and then we help them understand that they really do need this. And you've really succeeded in any conservation project when, as it comes to the end and they do the ribbon cutting, all of those people that had nothing to do with thinking about in the first place are there at the ribbon cutting, and you're not invited. So this law served as the basis for aquatic preserve laws throughout the country, and of course all the aquatic preserves we have now around Florida and which protect our coast in this region. Now back in '73, the second Monday group, I was also in the first Monday, our first Monday group, we spent a lot of time protecting Estero Bay from being developed like Cape Coral, and fought the Estuaries Project and laid the groundwork which could later then become the buffer preserve, and now the buffer preserve, or the state park buffer preserve, or the buffer preserve state park, the thing there that's still the buffer preserve called a park. And we were really alarmed with what was happening as Fort Myers was expanding. Now, we're talking in '73 here. The south end of town was the Edison Mall. And we saw it was heading towards 6 Mile Cypress. And so the students in this group, of which there were 2 from every high school, got together and said, we need to protect this area, and the only way we're really going to protect this area is by purchasing it. So they got together and started an initiative within Lee County to put together a ballot initiative to get Lee County to vote to tax themselves to purchase the 6 Mile Cypress Slough Preserve. This is before 2020 and all these other things which we now have today. And it took 3 years to go through the process, get it onto the ballot. It took 3 Monday groups, but the students of each year class handed it on to the next, and the other students had the persistence of vision. And so in 1976, it was voted on, passed overwhelmingly, and that was the beginning of the purchase of the 6 Mile Cypress Slough back in '76, November 2nd. Other ideas aren't always land acquisition, but really are critical for our conservation purposes. The idea for panther wildlife undercrossings, and by the way, this really entertains me. Every time I see a new article, a newspaper article about, gee, new idea, wildlife undercrossings. The idea started in 1972 in the environmental impact statement for converting Alligator Alley to I-75. And you'll see down in the lower here a graphic vision from the EIS. They used to do hand-painted figures for environmental impact statements of what the vision of that wildlife underpass would look like. I worked very hard on this over the many years, first as a citizen, then as an employee of the Department of Environmental Regulation. And I had the opportunity to do the permitting for the Collier County section of that. And in a big partnership in which all the agencies agreed with each other, the Game and Freshwater Fish Commission, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Army Corps of Engineers, and I in the Department of Environmental Regulation, we all said we needed to have these wildlife underpasses at these locations in Collier County when we expanded the 2-lane Alligator Alley to the 4-lane I-75. And during that process, we had enormous pushback. The Florida Department of Transportation said, what are we doing this for? You know, this is silly. It's going to cost $1 million an underpass. And if you make us build these things, then we're going to put in the newspaper after we build them that you personally, your name, wasted all these tax dollars to put these things together, and they're not being used. Well, we still insisted. We had excellent research. The science came first here. People who had been studying the panther looked where the panthers were already crossing Alligator Alley, and we located those underpasses in those locations. That's why they're clustered in some places and spread apart in other places. It's also understood that we needed very high fences because the panthers wouldn't necessarily use the underpasses if they could cross the road in any location. But those fences were also valuable in the interstate because they would limit access. When it was Alligator Alley, you could pull off anywhere on that road and go out into the Big Cypress or the Fakahatchee Strand or any place you wanted to anytime. And that's what was going on all along that section of the very valuable habitat. And so as part of the environmental impact statement, the Federal Highway Administration bought the access rights for all of the land along that road so they could fence it off and no longer have road access there. And they also set it up so there would be no more major roads connecting in the Collier County section except for State Road 29. Cut off the major roads that were coming down from Golden Gate Estates, because if those still went to the interstate, there would be a boom of development. We also, as part of this process, made sure we bought the land around the intersection of State Road 29, the 4 square miles around that, so there wouldn't be a boom of development at that intersection. And we set it up, and when I say we, I mean me, said that instead of digging out Fakahatchee Strand with a canal, let's do a borrow pit down in the southwest corner here where we had this old junk car lot and turn that borrow pit into something that was a functional lake. And we used Game and Fish Commission experts on how to make a good bass lake, on how we would dig that borrow pit and make that a good fishing area, and then take the spoil from that to build up the road grade. Also, as mitigation for the secondary and cumulative impacts of this whole process, the Florida Panther Preserve was acquired. And that is the reason why we have a Florida Panther Preserve today. And also, many sections of land which at that time formed a stair-step boundary on the Big Cypress National Preserve were acquired. Now, this got real complicated. It wasn't just money for this land, because the Collier family who owns the land didn't necessarily want the money because the appraised value of here didn't come up very high. They were much more interested in other federal lands. So there became this very involved situation where they were willing to trade lands they had in Collier County for sections of downtown Arizona City. And this took a while. It took about 6 years to work it all out, but it was done. Multiple different tools to achieve the outcome. The result today is we now have Florida panther and many other wildlife utilizing these undercrosses. Once the fences were installed, in the places where fences are in place, not towards the ends, but where the fences are in place, we haven't had any panther hits on the roadway in those sections. And then this became a model for other underpasses that we've done since then, up State Road 29 and other parts of the state, here in Lee County and other locations. So the persistence of vision, and it took us many years to do this. Starting in 72, the project completed in 96, and still today we still have more work to do because, quite frankly, it would be good to get those fences extended further toward the west. But everybody working together in a partnership and science first. Years later, I was invited to come and talk about wildlife underpasses and wildlife planning with FDOT. And one of those gentlemen in FDOT who told me that this would never work was up there with a paper at the conference where FDOT took full credit for the Panther undercrossings on I-75. And it's the best idea they ever had. Now, we've been working on integrating our wildlife acquisitions into interconnections along the landscape. Over here in the blue is an old AutoCAD of the first concepts of a regional wildlife habitat planning for Southwest Florida that I worked on in a very old computer. And over to the side is how we can do it today with much better GIS products. But we were looking at the lands we had acquired, what other lands needed to be acquired, and what we could do not only to make the interconnections, but also pick up habitats we hadn't yet picked up. And so eventually this became the Florida Wildlife Corridor Planning, started in 1990. This didn't start in 2000. This didn't start with QUILT. This has been ongoing in this region for many decades. And you all have helped me with this. Many of you here in the room have helped with this. And many citizens have. And many elected officials have. And we've met together. We tried to get together on a regular basis and share each other's work. And by the partnerships formed in this process, we've had local governments from other areas supporting the projects of other local governments at the state level. And it was really rewarding when you'd go up to a hearing on the old coral lands, and you'd have people from Sarasota and Manatee and Charlotte and Collier speaking for Lee County projects, and people from Lee County speaking for Collier projects. And we would all work together towards this goal. And we've achieved a great deal because of that. And so now we do have the ability for a Florida black bear to walk from Charlotte Harbor to Lake Okeechobee. And we need to finish it, but we'll get down to the Big Cypress so that large-scale landscape corridors of acquisition are achievable, and we're achieving them. It's fascinating to me when I'm invited to international conferences on climate change, and they're saying, you know, we really should think about getting this large-scale land acquisition so when sea level rise comes, we have a place for the animals to move to. And I said, well, let me show you this. And they're just in shock. The people in Europe say, well, wow, we thought you didn't know anything in Florida. But here it is. We all worked on this together. And we do have the Coastal Conservation Corridor Plan, which was a joint effort of the Game and Fish Commission with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, with the Nature Conservancy, and all of us worked together towards these goals. And this exists. It's available, and we still upgrade it, and we take out things as, you know, if we miss a piece because a Walmart moved into that spot, then we cut those out. But if we learn new things, we can add new to it. And we're achieving it. The Charlotte Harbor Flatwoods Yucca Pens acquisition restoration. Started thinking about this, planning for it in 1990. In fact, we started talking about this when I was working with the Aquatic Preserve with Bob Repenning, and that this would be something good. Worked with the Nature Conservancy on this, and nominated it for coral one year. It didn't make it. Nominated it for coral the next year. You know, we weren't going to stop. We were going to keep going. And now today we've got this acquisition, not completed yet, but still going on, but started in 1990. Still needs to be finished, but beautiful habitat at some of the largest tracts of hydric pine flatwood west of US 41 remaining. The Myakka Prairie, Sarasota County ELAP, and the Longino Ranch conservation easements. The beautiful Myakka Island concept. Sarasota County has been a wonderful leader in trying to make sure that its county wasn't wall-to-wall platted lands. And it's worked on this persistence of vision. How many of you remember epoxy? Yeah, epoxy. We weren't going to let anything like Lakewood Ranch be on the east side of I-75, were we? We were going to make sure that was all conservation lands. Well, it's pretty much getting there. What's remaining you've gotten, and you've used multiple tools. There have been state monies, there have been water management district monies with the Myakka Prairies. The county's been a wonderful land acquirer, and the use of real conservation easements for conservation purposes. And when I say acquisition, I do also mean less than fee simple acquisition when it makes sense. But do not, please, and this is my personal opinion, but it's borne out with years of experience, do not buy temporary easements. All temporary easements is a holding pattern for the developer. And it's a waste of our public funds to pay someone to wait until the market gets better for them. Corkscrew Regional Ecosystem Watershed, wonderful concept, started in the 1990s. I remember going out in this and walking with a whole bunch of different folks that are, some of whom I go way back in conservation purposes in Lee County. And the idea we'd build this partnership among all these entities. Its management entity is a partnership of agencies and entities working together and looking towards protecting the core freshwater resources of Lee and Collier County. Real good success, many different tools used, acquisition to a large extent in Lee County, the use of the Rural Land Stewardship Program, getting things set aside in Collier County. Different tools, different places, all working towards the same goals. What's critical here is we don't need to abandon these boundaries. In fact, we need to expand them. We need to get the agri-partners Edison Farms property as well. We just can't let people temporarily say, well, let's move the boundary because I think I might be able to put a ballpark here. We need to look at the science. The science needs to be first. Okay, Babcock Ranch, Liz talked about this. Big partnership, worked on it since '90 and achieved the major part of the acquisition in 2006. And really an outstanding connector between all of these habitats, and one that's moving towards being able to be a new partnership, as she had mentioned, with a management plan where we hope it can self-support. When I presented the proposal for the acquisition to the governor and the cabinet, I was able to use all these tools we had developed together. The regional wildlife habitat planning, the coastal conservation corridor. I had the support of NGOs like the Nature Conservancy, showing how this all fitted in as a key link for all of our habitats together. And so we had a Governor Jeb Bush saying, this is a good idea. And Charlie Crist made the motion. This is something we need to have. And we had a cabinet that was really thinking, this is the way Florida needs to be, where we can also have conservation in a natural landscape with some uses, but at the same time providing all of those functions. And Babcock was a partnership. There was a lot of citizens working on it, Lee County commissioners, big supporters, and as you mentioned, the purchasing came from multiple sources to make all the pieces together. Lee County acquired a large part of what's in the Lee County side of this. So you need to build your partnerships, and when you have naysayers, I will tell you, I got a lot of hate while I was working on this project from environmental people who said, you're not getting the whole thing. And they were saying, Jim, you've got to abandon the acquisition because you're not getting all 90,000 acres. You're only getting 79,000 acres. Not here, but I'll show you a little later. Sometimes things fail because of the infighting among entities that should all be working together. Now, here's an example of how this all fits into many other tools. Water Management District and I guess it was DEP by this time, also had shown this in their major greenways mapping, which had been independently done. So you can show multiple sources of evidence why your particular acquisition is of value. The Southern Golden Gate Estates started thinking about the idea of getting this platted, subdivided, road-built, drained subdivision purchased and put back in the acquisition in 1979. Everyone said it was impossible. Literally thousands of individual estate lots, one after another, had already been sold in this area to people from all around the world. How could you possibly acquire this? How could you possibly set this aside? It was a persistence of vision. We didn't give up. We talked about this everywhere we went. We worked together in partnerships. We worked with every agency we could. We got it into the Everglades Restoration Plan. We partnered with the Conservancy of Southwest Florida, who got real estate agents to work lot by lot by lot by lot. Eventually, realtors down in that part of the county start bundling lots together so they can make the sales and get the commissions. And it went on and on and on and on. And even when we had some holdouts that went to court, dealt with the holdouts, made arrangements with the Indian tribes that own some of the lands there, and now it's a restoration project on its way to being restored. The canals are being backfilled, roads are being pulled up, and it's going to be rehydrated. There's monitoring associated with this, so we'll be able to demonstrate through amphibians, through wading birds, through hydrology, that this is going to be a successful restoration. You just have to have a persistence of vision. No land acquisition project is impossible if you work together, you have the citizen support, and you have a persistence of vision. Serenova Starkey Ranch. When I first saw this project up in Pasco County, it was being approved as a development of regional impact. It got its approval as a development of regional impact. This thing was going to look something like Lakewood Ranch because they were waiting for the Veterans Parkway to come up through here, and then they were going to build their bedroom community for people to sleep in Pasco and then drive down to work in Tampa and St. Pete. Well, when the Veterans Parkway permitting came in and I was working for the Game and Fish Commission, I said, whoa, you're running this parkway through all this valuable habitat, bear, scrub, we had scrub jays, we had Florida mouse, we had indigo snake, gopher tortoises, all over the place. And I said, this is the wrong pathway for the road. And I held support and backing. Now, Pasco County initially wasn't in support of us rerouting the road, but eventually they came along to the idea. And we took the road, which was a big S-curve through this habitat, to make it a straight line along one boundary. And then I said, well, you got secondary and cumulative impacts. They said, well, how can we offset this? I said, well, I think you really need to buy Serenova and Starkey Ranch and set them aside as mitigation for the Suncoast Parkway. And we did a partnering with FDOT, and they were really good partners on this one. It's some of the same people I worked with on Alligator Alley. And everyone working together, the Regional Planning Council in Tampa Bay, the people up in those counties, other counties working together, all the agencies, the Water Management District backed this, the Game and Fish Commission backed it, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, all working together. They actually bought out the DRI and bought a section of Starkey Ranch and put it together as a big, large habitat. And now it's serving both as conservation lands and a well field to supply the water supply needs for that region, from aquifers well below what would affect the surface area. So, approved DRI, impossible land acquisition? No. A persistence of vision, support of the public, all working together with partnerships, using different tools. The Frog Listening Network. It's important when we get land, we need to show that it's being successful. And we need to have environmental indicators to monitor those land uses. And one of the things, when I was working with the Hillsborough River Greenways Task Force, we did was we said, what could be the most sensitive thing that we can have citizens working together to help us with monitoring? And the answer was the Frog Listening Network. And we built partnerships. I worked with the Busch Gardens people to help put together the disc and tape, which had all the frog calls with the mnemonics, and I narrated, how the different frogs sounded like different things, how the green tree frog sounded like a frog, someone in the woods saying, hey baby, hey baby, hey baby, hey baby, And we put together this, and we trained the citizens. We had workshops at Lowry Park Zoo, at the Florida Aquarium. We had an exhibit at the Florida Aquarium. People came, they monitored. Today down here we have the amphibian monitoring network that John Cassani is operating on. This has been going on for 11 years plus. And it's a really great way to do monitoring. Now, the Hillsborough River Greenways Task Force was very successful, a partnership initiated by private ranchers who were very interested in protecting the Greenway. We were able to get Cone Ranch purchased. We were able to get the Two Rivers Ranch purchased. We almost got, the Blackwater Ranch purchased. We almost got Two Rivers Ranch purchased. And they were ready to do that with the purchase of the main corridor and conservation easements for the main ranch. And what fouled it up was an environmental organization. When that environmental organization said, look, a conservation easement's not enough. We need to have the whole thing. And then the partnership fell apart. So we lost a key link in this greenway because one partner said, we disagree, we want more. And so you really have to work together and continue to work this through. I thought we might have been able to salvage it, but once there was that one objection, then the Water Management District withdrew its funding, and then a number of other things happened. So, a cautionary tale. The Greenways Task Force doesn't exist anymore, but its work's being continued by the Watershed Alliance. Now, ecosystem services is a good way to communicate the value of these habitats drawn together by the thread of water. And there are a multitude of resources and processes that are supplied by the natural ecosystems. And nowadays, this seems to be the way that most decision makers I talk with want me to hear talking to them about why we should do land acquisition and stewardship. It's for the services they provide. And so we can calculate, for example, for Charlotte Harbor, this is work that I've done in recent research, that it's about $48.7 billion in 2012 dollars of total ecosystem services value. This is everything that mangroves do for us, for all the mangroves around Charlotte Harbor. For seagrass beds, it's about $8 billion in 2012 dollars. And for our salt marshes, about $76.48 million. Part of the dollar reasons is the relative extent of the habitats. There's a lot more mangroves than there are seagrasses than there are salt marshes. But for the first time, we'll now be able to know where all the salt marshes are around Charlotte Harbor and know them by their type. So by showing this to people, this is what you're getting from these habitats being purchased. As Lisa mentioned earlier, for every dollar that you do in land conservation, you save $50 you don't have to spend on transportation. And we can even break it down into particularly interesting values for certain decision makers, so that each time you get rid of a hectare of coastal wetlands, whether it's mangrove or salt marsh, you increase the storm damage from a hurricane by $33,000 for each hectare you lose. And that the annual storm protection value of each hectare per year, year after year after year, is $8,240. So that's a really good deal when you consider, you know, that's doing all these other functions for you, like building your recreational and commercial fisheries, cleaning your water and all this. Plus it's protecting you from our tropical storms, which are going to get more frequent and which are going to be more severe. So some of the things I've learned over the years, and these are my concepts, this is not the official position of the Regional Planning Council. We need to have a persistence of vision. Conservation takes time. Even that acquisition of 6 Mile Cypress, it's still going on using a variety of acquisition tools. We still have a few more pieces to pick up that remain in that project. Science needs to come first. And you need to know why that parcel is valuable. And now, adding to your science tools, you should be able to do an ecosystem services calculation for what you're working on. And it takes a variety of tools to achieve this test. No one tool works for everything. And different local governments, different agencies have all different priorities, but you can find the tool. If you look, if you really want to do the project, you can find the tool to do it. Public participation always makes a better plan, and it engenders the support. I would not go out today with a new project if I didn't talk with the public first and work with them and work on why this is an important project to do. Land acquisition is the best tool for long-term land protection because it's a team effort. And when we build the team, then we also build the support for that particular parcel or that particular section. And actually, we need to team on our regional wildlife vision, our regional land stewardship vision, and maintain that team and not be balkanized. Because one of the things people who don't want land acquisition really would like to do and like to see is for all of us to break up into pieces and disagree with each other and not put together a common plan. Now, regulations change, and not always for the better in this century. And we're looking at more changes, which will probably be even worse. So unless land is acquired, it's necessary to fight the same battles over and over and over again. And even some people have bad ideas about what to do once you even have land acquired. I've spent a lot of time working with people trying to push roads off of public land easements, get power lines out of there, you name it, putting elephants on parks, golf courses. You know, people come up with really bad ideas. I mentioned to you this because there are people who think it would be a great idea to build marinas on the buffer preserves somewhere in this state. So don't delay in your land acquisition just because management funds are not currently available. I've seen really good parcels lost because people said, well, we don't have enough management funds for what we have now, and we won't have management funds for this new acquisition, so we can't afford to buy anything else. Well, you will never have enough funds for the best management of your property. But if you get that land set aside, you will always have something to show people that you need management funds for. And through time, using different tools, using different skills, with citizen support, you will find ways to get management done. And it may not always be the way you anticipated it. It may not be even with the agency you thought it was coming from. Because quite frankly, most agencies that I've worked for in the state of Florida have had a shorter half-life than my land acquisition projects. So things will change, but our preservation of land should not. So please keep that persistence of vision. And thank you all for working so hard with us to protect Southwest Florida and the lands we have here.
Good morning. I have a question about your calculations for the value of the ecosystem services. Could you just expand on that a little bit? I understand the disaster part of it, but when you're talking about the actual function of the mangroves and barrier, all of that, if you could just talk about that a little bit more.
Okay, for any given habitat type, there are a wide variety of ecosystem services that habitat provides in terms of provisioning and types of direct consumptive use that we make of it. So like a mangrove, for example, is not only providing the habitat for many organisms, but it provides a fishery which we then harvest, which then gives you a dollar value associated with that harvest, either whether it be commercial or it be recreational. And then you have to look at the extended life cycles of some of the organisms. So the organism that may be spending part of its life as a small fish, a larval fish among the mangroves, may be harvested out in the Gulf of Mexico, but the mangrove has contributed a partial economic value to that harvest of the larger fish in the Gulf of Mexico. The mangroves are also providing a stabilization of substrate, which provides water clarity. The mangroves also take and make oxygen for us to breathe. Mangroves also have a benefit in terms of providing a temperature differential along the shoreline so that you have sort of a natural air conditioning associated with it. The mangroves are also involved in sequestering nutrients into biomass, and they've been demonstrated through studies to be the most effective carbon sink in the world. And they're actually, if we wanted to do carbon mitigation, for global warming purposes, we should be planting mangroves, not corn. Also, mangroves will have an aesthetic value because they are the view. They don't block the view, they are the view. And we can demonstrate economically with data we have from Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge that people will spend an enormous amount of German marks, or I guess it's euros now, to come all the way from a cold place in Germany to Southwest Florida, to spend in a hotel, to use a restaurant, to go out to see the mangroves and the roseate spoonbills at Ding Darling National Wildlife Refuge. So when you put all of those values together for the mangroves in our region, and then you cross-calculate that over the acres of mangroves that we have, you're able to get a per acre total economic value of mangroves. And so that's how I calculated this. And it's massive spreadsheet tables for each habitat type. Interestingly enough, the science is developed best for wetlands. So we can get TEVs for saltwater and freshwater wetlands with the information relatively easily, and I'm easily in quotes. It's much less information on trying to calculate a total economic value, say for a tropical hardwood hammock or a dry prairie. But I'm hoping as time goes on, the science will advance and we'll gather more information. We just need to get some people out there with oxygen, CO2 tents. We need to get some folks that are looking at how many people come to see the dry prairie, come to see the tropical hardwood hammock, and start getting some more data. One of the things that would help me get better calculations, folks, is if I had better visitor information to your preserves, to the lands you're a steward of. The park system's great at this. Some of the local governments have good records, but others do not. And if we could get some better estimate of how many people are coming, because it turns out that the human use of natural systems has a much, when you stack up the columns, that really gets you a lot of dollars for the people who like to go to, believe it or not, a beach without buildings on it. There's a much higher economic value to people for beaches on Cayo Costa than beaches, and I don't want to ruin any community, beaches with a condo and a seawall behind it. Anywhere, you know. So that's another thing that's tricky about total economic value. Our mangroves here are much, much more valuable per acre than mangroves in Thailand because our economy is so much more inflated. So the fact that people build multi-million-dollar homes next to mangroves here, and they don't do that so much in Thailand, gives the relative economic value, that part of the total economic value, a higher value here.
Jim, we have another question over here.
Yes. You indicated there's some controversy among environmental organizations, and I've been concerned lately because it seems to me they're proliferating. Every day there's a new environmental organization, and you can't tell them apart. The names are like the political advertisements we're having on TV now. I would like to hear a little more about the Watershed Alliance and how they can get these organizations to cooperate.
Well, one of the reasons there's two reasons you're seeing some proliferation in environmental organizations. There's a tendency for the national groups to create focuses. And at one time, you had a national group saying, in Florida, there are 3 essential places we're going to protect. We're going to protect up in North Florida, in the Apalachicola, we're going to protect the Central Ridge Scrubs, and we're going to protect the Florida Keys. So how did that make people in Lee County feel? You know, when the national group said, well, we're not going to worry about doing any protection of your area. So then a local group becomes engendered. And there was actually a large movement in the 90s of local land trusts forming because they were able to focus on their area and the areas that they were concerned with. And actually some of our land trusts, like the Calusa Land Trust, acquired more land in their area than anybody else was doing, and actually superseded some of the state and federal acquisitions which are going on for certain years. But there's another thing you have to watch with environmental groups. There was another thing that went on in the 90s called the wise use movement. And these were people who were not in favor of conservation, adopting names of organizations that sounded like they were conservation organizations. Yeah. And so you really need to, before you just go by a name, find out what the source is of it, who are these people behind it, and what their actual agenda is. And in fact, if you look at the names of some of these PACs that are floating around here, it sounds like mom and apple pie organizations, when in fact they're basically perpetrators of the Ayn Rand philosophy, or Ayn Rand philosophy. Groups like EcoSwift, the Environmental Confederation of Southwest Florida, and the Watershed Alliance up in Hillsborough County should bring the legitimate organizations together for meetings and partnerships. National estuary programs can provide fora like this, and our regional planning councils to a large extent try to help with this too. But you got to watch among yourselves, the environmental organizations do, and if you see something that pretends to be one and isn't, let people know, let the media know, expose the invertebrates, and let people know that these are not the real thing, that you are, and really also think about what are your long-term goals. Every environmental group should say, this is what I'd like to see happen in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years. And then see who else has those same goals and work together. There's not a single legitimate environmental organization I haven't had a wonderful relationship to. But do please work together, and to the extent that I'm able to, I'll help you with it. Thank you very much.